Hey there, welcome back to High Infidelity, the best channel for cheating stories. Like and subscribe to channel for more spicy stories. Now, let's get into today's story video. I, 25 male, feel very betrayed by my G/F24 female from the way we entered into our relationship, and I feel deceived about how she has portrayed herself. Law. We met 3 years ago at a mutual friends gathering. We ended up spending the remainder of the night simply sitting and chatting to each other after we were introduced. We felt like we were the only two people there, and as the night came to a close, she told me how much she loved talking to me and asked for my phone number. This was my first time doing so. I awakened the following morning to a text from her saying how much she loved chatting with me and asking if we could get together to discuss some more. I agreed, and the next weekend we met in a small bookstore/coffee shop, where we spoke for 5 hours until the establishment booted us out because they were closing. We never discussed anything romantic, love, or similar in any of our chats. Everything from philosophy to economics to religion and everything in between was covered. She tells me she had a lovely time again and asks if we may do it again. We pick a date for the next weekend, and the same thing occurs. This happens 3 more times, and I'm still not sure what it is. Is it merely a group of buddies getting together to talk? Is there any further plans for this? I had absolutely no notion. She texts me the week before our meeting, telling me that I am the easiest person she has ever spoken to, and that she feels completely at ease and secure with me. So, ultimately, towards the end of the following day, when she says she wants to do this again, I simply asked her what she thought of our moments together. I inquired whether we were simply friends or if there was a chance we might be more. She said that she had a great experience with us and is excited to see where it leads. The next time we were together, as we were chatting, I reached out and grabbed her hand, and for the first time, we held hands for many minutes. At the conclusion of the night, I tell her that the next time I see her, I'd want to do something new, and I take her to the movies. Things went swimmingly, and throughout the film, I wrapped my arm around her, and she rested her head on my shoulder. As we separated that night, I mustered the guts to lean in and kiss her goodbye. I was surprised by her reaction. She really dropped out of my endeavor, and I instantly apologized to her, feeling like a complete jerk. She stated I didn't need to apologize, but she was surprised since she wasn't expecting it. I hastily apologized once again and withdrew for the evening, ashamed beyond belief. She emailed me the following day, saying she was sorry for the previous night, that she genuinely loved me and wanted to develop our relationship in that way, but that she wanted to take things slowly. I responded that I was happy to proceed at any pace she desired and apologized once again since I felt terrible. Now, although I indicated I was willing to proceed at her pace, which I was also perplexed by what taking it slow meant. For almost 2 months, we had been seeing one another once a week for hours at a time, but being new in the dating world, I only had a G/F in high school and went on dates in college, largely as friends, and nothing ever lasted. I decided to let her take the lead. We went out 2 more times, and at the start of our 3rd date, she actually kissed me. From then, our relationship progressed at what I believed to be a typical rate. We were living together a year and a half later, and everything was going swimmingly in my opinion. That is, until she had to pick me up at work 2 weeks ago, since my vehicle was in the repair. She drove over and sat in her vehicle, and one of my coworkers, with whom I'm friends, got out with me as he was leaving at the same time. I introduced them from a distance, but they were obviously visible to each other. We waved goodbye and walked away. The following day I returned and he stated he wanted to make sure there wouldn't be any problems between the two of us. I asked him why, and he answered, "She didn't say anything to you." I responded she didn't, and he said, "Well, that was a couple of years ago, so she may not even remember him." And then he goes on to tell me that they linked up on Tinder and would for a few months before he began seeing his current lady friend. I told him it may have been a different individual, and he then showed me her Tinder profile. I never used the site before, so I wasn't sure what to search for, but he claimed she isn't active on there right now and hasn't been for a while. But the truth was that it was definitely her, and to make things worse, I didn't inform him that the time range he was referring to coincided with some of the time we spent together in the beginning. I've been chastised for leaning in for a kiss and may have ceased even after this. He could sense this was troubling me and apologized, but said I needed to know they were never dating or anything, just getting together to have, as if I was expected to be okay with that. He didn't want to say much further, but he did state that he knew for a fact that he wasn't the only one. Needless to say, This all irritated me considerably, but I had no idea what to do or how to deal with it. It was eating away at me, and I did something I definitely shouldn't have done, but we share an Outlook calendar, and had done so for over a year to schedule our activities. I checked into her laptop while she was gone and saw her perspective, which was little more than what we shared. I did observe, however, that she had a second calendar that was not password secured. Even though I knew it was incorrect, I looked back on her calendar and sure enough, there was his initial name, and yes, some of those dates were after we had already beyond the getting to know you stage. But hold on, there's more. Not only was his name there, but so were the names of numerous other people. There were periods when she had a new name every day of the week and twice when she had two names on weekends. What made me sickest was remembering the weeks early in our relationship when I had to be terrified to hold her hand since she was meeting with other males that week, and even one time earlier in the day when we met. You may wonder how I know this. My name was also on the list. Now, it seems that the names generally ended approximately 5 months after we began dating, and by a year in, there were no more names. But what really bothers me is that one person's name appears more often than others. And this is a guy she has brought to our home on several occasions and introduced us to. She has never mentioned that they were ever partners to me. That is, in fact, what irritates me about all of this. To be honest, if I didn't know any of this, I'd say she was a prude. It's incredibly boring, and I always have to start it. However, she recently informed me that she considers me to be her soulmate and that she loves me with all of her heart. To be honest, this is causing me a lot of anguish. I don't believe I'll be able to live with this. The fact that I had to wait months to even kiss and hold hands with her while she was having with a number of others makes me feel like a jerk. It truly irritates me that I was beating myself up after attempting a kiss. Then there's a part of me that thinks I'm not good enough. Yes, she could like my personality or whatever, but the fact that I'm not beautiful enough for her to want to be with me so early on irritates me. It's one thing if she did all of this before we met, but there are names plainly highlighted after we were connected, right before we moved in together. That includes the person I work with. I haven't confronted her yet. I'm not sure what I'm going to say or do. A huge part of me simply wants to get out of here. I get the impression that she is not the person she portrays herself to be. Oh, trust me, she is a highly judgmental person with a lot of ideas who comes off as holier than thou despite the fact that she is not religious. Has anybody else ever had to deal with anything like this? Update 1. After much thought, I determined that if everything was true, I didn't think I could live with it. From my perspective, it not only altered the first year of our relationship, but it profoundly altered who I felt she was. We all have varied reactions to different individuals, but there are certain things you can't be one way one day and another the next. But after reading some of the responses to my initial piece, I found myself agreeing on a handful of points. 1. Just because the names were there doesn't indicate she was sleeping with or dating those men. As previously said, my name was in there, and we certainly weren't having during a lot of these instances. 2. It felt awful to go without at least giving her an opportunity to explain things, which brought me to my dilemma. How can I tell her I knew all of these names? I snooped, just in case she forgot. I could probably tell her about my coworker, but how would I know about the other names? So I simply told her about the coworker and waited to see what happened next. This was the ugliest discussion I'd ever had. Because, on top of that, the G/F I've had has been fantastic. We've never argued or had even the slightest indication of dispute or treachery. I adore the person I imagined her to be, so I couldn't simply go without at least discussing it. She pretended she didn't know who my coworker was. She pretended to be surprised that he would say this and said that she didn't remember him. I bought everything she was selling at first because I wanted to and because she was incredibly persuasive. However, when I showed her the Tinder profile, she became defensive. She confirmed that she used to use Tinder but hasn't used it in years, which according to my coworker was true. So I was about to dismiss it and continue, but at the last minute I said to her, "He informed me about the dates you went out on and how they coincided with periods when you and I were together." To which she said that he was lying since it ended before we became a relationship. That's when I realized she was deceiving me. She had informed me she did recognize him, but when faced with the time frame, she claimed to know him and said the timing was incorrect. She felt furious and began weeping when I pointed out her logical mistake to her. My immediate reaction was to console her, but halfway through I realized she was probably doing it to manipulate me and stated that although I was there for her, I needed to know the truth And here is where I kind of lied to her. I told her he gave me a detailed timetable and showed me dates on his calendar. She stated she had no idea when it ended, but she assumed it was before we became a relationship. This is when I made the mistake of asking when she thought we were a couple. When we moved in together, she claimed she considered us a couple. Let me remind everyone that we had been dating for over 2 years before moving in together. So I asked her whether she had dated anybody else over that time period. She was adamant that she didn't date anybody. So I know it was vulgar, but I just came out and asked, "Okay, maybe you don't date anybody, but have you had with anyone?" She didn't respond, and I knew what I was going to say. By this point, she is sobbing excessively, telling me how much she loved me, how everything was so long ago, and so on. Because she was genuinely hyperventilating, I decided to give her a break before confronting her. I merely told her I knew about the person she brought to our place when she cooled down. This was clearly a topic she dreaded, as she went from screaming violently to pale as a ghost. At this time, she begins to apologize, claiming that none of the other men have ever meant anything to her and that I am the love of her life. I told her that the only way I'd consider working through this would be for her to come clean completely right then and there, and I sort of let her know that I already knew other things and would tell her how I knew it she asked. This was the one thing I now regret because she simply told me everything, stuff I had no desire to know in a million years, including verifying that she did, in fact, meet with Tinder dates twice on days we met later in the evening. She claimed she didn't consider us official, and we hadn't even said that we were dating those 2 occasions. She is right in terms of the date since this was before we kissed. Anyway, I told her I needed some time to think about it, and that I would be staying with a friend. She begged me not to leave. She was truly distraught, and she insisted that none of this was intended to harm me. She couldn't understand why I was unhappy about things that occurred before we met, but she could see why I would be upset about things that happened after we met. I departed to stay with a friend, but I pledged to keep contact open. The following morning, she sent me a lengthy emotional message, explaining how, as a teenager, she couldn't respect herself and relied on to justify herself, and how, until she met me, she had no idea what a true relationship or love was. It was lengthy and thorough, but that was the main point. I responded by thanking her for her honesty, but I also explained how her making me wait, and more importantly, making me feel like a creep for simply reaching out and kissing her while she was getting screwed by any number of guys, was very hurtful to me and, frankly, it made me doubt myself as a man and completely destroyed any romantic notions I had of our relationship. I couldn't tell whether she was unhappy or angry since she didn't answer to my text. However, a half hour later, my buddy informs me that she is at the door and is quite emotional. Would I want him to let her see me? When I opened the door, she burst out weeping, harder than I'd ever heard someone cry. She couldn't even speak. She tried and tried, but nothing made sense. I persuaded her to sit, and she launched herself at me, attempting to embrace me. She eventually got out that she was very sorry. She never intended to harm me, after she cooled down a bit. She eventually calmed herself enough to speak, and she let it be known that what I wrote to her was sad, even though she had never viewed it that way. She attempted to explain that she was so in love with me that she didn't want to ruin it and that she wanted us to be what she believed we had been. I let her go on, but ultimately told her that although it was her point of view, it was not mine. I just said that it made me feel ugly and less desirable than males who purportedly meant nothing to her. I went on for a long, but I'll spare you the specifics. I just informed her that I couldn't go back to the way things were since I no longer saw her as the same person. That she voluntarily had with other people after having with me was a deal breaker. She stepped in and stated that it never occurred after we slept together. She said she would easily confess to sleeping with other men up until we kissed, but after that night, she knew she loved me and stopped doing anything else. Obviously, I have no way of knowing, and I have little trust in what she stated, but I do have her calendar, and it does indicate a rapid slowdown exactly around that time. I told her I still needed time, and she contacted me that night with an emotional message expressing my sentiments about it and telling me that the fact she injured me made her feel worse than anything else. She would go to any length to make this work. She said she has never cheated on me and would never cheat on me since she fell in love with me. So I'm still in my friend's place. I'm still not sure what I'm going to do. I adore her, and I can see she isn't fake it. She is an emotional disaster. I phoned her family and asked them to go check on her. I simply told them we were having a difficult time and would like not to answer any further questions at the moment. I want to emphasize this once again, since I don't believe it was clear in my initial post. Her personality does not reflect any of this. In fact, she is quite critical of anyone who do what she did. Let's not go that far, since she never claimed to be a virgin. But she completely misled me into thinking she only believed in within the context of a relationship. That is now a proven untruth. I meant to meet her on Friday, but I'm not sure whether I'll go. Update 2. Later that afternoon, I met with a buddy who had heard of her but had never met her. I was looking for someone with a completely new viewpoint and an outside voice. In other words, someone who had never met her or developed an impression about her. I merely requested his opinion after explaining all I stated in the previous 2 postings. He stated he wouldn't provide an opinion since he and I didn't get along, but he would ask me to ponder certain questions. Would I have pursued her if I had known she was having with several people? Would I have stayed in the relationship if I had known she was going on obvious dates with me but having with numerous partners? Do I regard her as the same person I dated, fell in love with, and moved in with now that I know what I didn't know back then? Did I imagine a future with her in which I would have an unconditional, trusting, loving relationship? He had other inquiries, but none were as vital or as pressing as these. I'm not sure why. But these questions crystallized my thinking and what I needed to accomplish. That doesn't imply it was simple or enjoyable. On Friday, I took the day off from work with 2 of my friends, and while she was at work, I packed up everything in our apartment that belonged to me and put it to storage. Fortunately, I don't own much, and I determined that whatever we purchased jointly would be left at her place. Fortunately, we were already out of our contract and were just renting on a month-to-month basis, so I don't have any long-term financial concerns. But in order not to be unjust, I delved into my funds and pulled out 6 months of what would have been my share of the rent. She returned home from work at 5:30, and as she walked in, she saw my things was gone. She dropped her bag on the floor, sat on the sofa, and began weeping. This was the most difficult thing I'd ever done, and I ended up sobbing just as much as she did. I basically told her she didn't deserve to be with someone who had any reservations about her or had anything other than a completely positive vision of who she is. I told her that I needed to work on myself because, after chatting with a friend and reading on this site, I realized that a lot of my notions about in relationships are not in line with current thinking, and I know I need to go over that. I am certain she will be much better off without me because, at the end of the day, I just cannot be who she requires of me. I wish I could simply dismiss it as insignificant, but I can't. Anyway, I remained as long as it made sense to attempt to comfort her, but at the end of the day, I couldn't. So I left her crying on the couch. This did not end the way I had anticipated or expected, but at the end of the day, we are both very young, and life is too short. She'll find a new man quickly, and I'm going to focus on myself to see if I can't learn from this. Also, before I go, I'd want to reply to some of the comments made about my coworker, who is the one who began all of this. Obviously, I'll never know what motivated him. He may simply be a jerk, as others have said, and I'll never know. However, I believe he was concerned she might say anything and didn't want there to be a problem between us at work. According to both of their testimonies, he is the one who broke up with her in order to date the female he is presently with. So, although it might be envy or something else, I have my doubts. If he had wanted to be with her, I believe he could have since he stopped whatever their relationship was.